Someone must lead, the old man said, and someone must follow. That is the way of things. Fucking bootlicker.
This is the introduction song. It's not very good, but it's not too long.
Alright, so what in the fuck did I actually just read? Like, that was possibly one of the most insane endings to any book series I've ever read. It was absolutely amazing. I mean, the first two books were great, don't get me wrong, but the way they built up to the final confrontation in Hero of Ages and the way it pays itself off, I mean, I've only seen that done a couple other times in my entire life. This book is fucking incredible. So Hero of Ages starts off a little while after the Well of Ascension ended. You know, Vin accidentally released Ruin into the world, and he's now slowly going around destroying everything. So Elend, who has now made a Mistborn, has finally decided to stop pussyfooting around, and he's going around conquering the rest of the Final Empire by force, and they're hoping to find the rest of the Lord Ruler's storage caches, because one, those have supplies that people will need, and two, they have information, and they're hoping that the information there can help them fight Ruin. It's pretty simple and to the point, but really that's what we need in this final chapter of a trilogy, because the first two books are mostly all about setup. I mean, not to say they're all about setup, they still have their own conflicts and their own action and a lot of neat stuff in there, but this one is all of that coming to a head, you know, so we don't really need to introduce a whole lot of new plot points or new characters or anything like that. Not to say that this one doesn't, it does introduce some new stuff, and that's really good. I'm just saying that plot-wise, this one is just all about the final confrontation and trying to stop Ruin. Now, like I said, this book is fucking great, but I just want to talk about the couple of things that bothered me before I move on to the good stuff. Number one, at a couple of points, the dialogue is kinda weird. Like it's not terrible, and it's only once in a while. I can't even really put my finger on why the dialogue is weird. I think it might just be that the characters aren't talking the way they normally do, but there are just a few points in this book where the dialogue just felt off to me. And it's not a huge deal, but it was... I would feel odd if I didn't mention it. Number two, the plot is a little bit less focused than the first two books. Now this one is actually not even completely bad, because in my review of the second book I mentioned that I wanted to see a little bit more of the world outside of Luthadel, because Luthadel was cool and all, but I just wanted to see the outside, you know, and we finally get that in this one. You know, we see other cities, we see how other people have dealt with the collapse of the Empire, we get a lot more information about the Kandra and the Koloss, and that's really cool. But at the same time, there are some subplots here which just are a little... they're not as good as the main story. Now, these plots tie into the main story, because there's one about Tensoon, the Kandra that betrayed Vin near the end of the last book, and he has gone back to the Kandra homeland and is basically just on trial for breaking his contract. And there's a lot of talk with him trying to convince his people, like, hey, we need to change things, we need to do this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying it's bad, because when it starts off, it's really, really interesting. And the way it ends is also really, really interesting. It dips a little in the middle, though, because I just found myself not caring as much, and those chapters were a little harder to get through, but they were never terrible. There's also a subplot with Spook, the Tin Eye that was a member of their crew in the first two books, and he is just spying in another city which Elend has not been able to take control of. And seeing that city itself is kind of interesting, because you're seeing, like, okay, that's another part of the rebellion that took over, we could see how things might have turned out worse if someone else had taken over, blah, blah, blah. But also, it's just not as interesting, because a lot of it is just Spook watching things and going, that's bad. I guess I should report this back to others. But later on, it gets a lot better. Like, Spook actually starts doing things, he starts helping and contributing. It's just a lot of, I don't want to say filler, but there's a bit of a slog getting to that point. But again, it's never terrible. Number three, near the beginning of this book, Vin and Elend fight an Inquisitor, and they have a difficult time of it. It's not an easy fight, but they do beat him, and after that the Inquisitors just aren't nearly as intimidating as they should be. Because, remember, in the second book they really didn't fight Inquisitors at all, and in the first one, when Kelsier fought that one near the end and actually killed it, that was a huge fucking deal. I mean, because before that, they were supposed to be these unstoppable monstrosities, and when Kelsier finally killed one, it's like, oh, okay, they can be killed, and it's a huge fucking deal. It shows off how badass it is, it just, all that, but then, in this one, it's still a difficult fight, but it's just not as big of a deal, and then so later on, when they're fighting other Inquisitors, it's just not as big of a deal when they're fighting them. It's not as intimidating as it could be, and so some of the final fights, I'm not saying they're bad, I'm just saying they could have been a lot better if we had just avoided that one fight at the beginning. And number 4, my biggest issue with this book, there's a lot of talk about religion in this one, okay? And I'd just like to say right off that I appreciate Brandon Sanderson having the stones to tackle that, because that's a very controversial subject, and a lot of people just don't want to talk about it. I get that, so I appreciate him actually talking about it at all. But the way it's handled is problematic, because so most of it is just Sazed, and Sazed, at the end of the last book, lost his faith in religion. Not that he really had much to begin with. And so in this one, he's just going through all of the religions that he's collected and learned about, and he's looking for contradictions in them, and just when he finds one, he throws it out, and he's trying to find the one true religion that's out there. And so minor spoilers here. Near the end of the book, he goes through all of them, and he finds out that, okay, none of these are true. But then he decides, you know what, I'm just going to believe what makes me happy, because it makes me happier to think that there is some sort of higher power out there looking after us, and the idea that we're alone is very depressing and upsetting, so I'm just going to believe what makes me happy. And I don't like that at all. That's a very dangerous mindset to be promoting. It's the same reason I didn't like Life of Pi, because that was basically the message of that book. It's a dangerous mindset because, you know, people have to live in the real world. We can't just pretend that things work differently than they do. We kind of have to work off of logic and facts and all that. And I'm not saying you have to give up on religion at all. Just clarifying. I'm just saying we can't just pretend that the world is different than it is because it makes us happy. You know, that's a mindset that a lot of very bad organizations and governments and people would love for more people to have. And so I don't like that this book is kind of promoting that. However, near the end, Sazed's mindset does change a little bit, and at one point he says that all of the religions he collected, none of them were the truth, but they all had truth in them, and I can get behind that a little bit more. I just really don't like how they handled it at first. Other than that, though, this book was just about perfect. I mean, the plot, other than the couple of little iffy bits, was great. I mean, every bit of information and every Chekhov's gun from the first couple of books and this one finally comes into fold. Like, they finally fucking use Vin's earring. That's actually an important plot point, believe it or not. And the mists and ruin preservation, we find out so much more about all that, and a bunch of things just click into place, so by the time the final confrontation rolls around, you're like, okay, everything has been building up to this. And then the final confrontation happens, and it's like this 150-page-long climax. There's giant epic battles, there's fucking crazy-ass powers, there's fights. Oh, man, it's fucking awesome, believe me. I don't want to go on for it too long because I can't really describe it all that well without just telling you everything that happens, but it's fucking awesome, believe me. The characters get a lot more development. Like, even ones like Vin and Elend that have already had a lot keep going. They still continue to grow as people and as characters, and by the time the end rolls around, you're like, wow, Vin, you've come a long way. And like I said about Elend, you know, he finally stops pussyfooting around and just is a hardcore badass while still being a good dude. Like, he never goes full Lord Ruler on us. He's a good guy. And then you have people like Sazed, who are having like an existential crisis, but by the end he does shape up and decide, okay, it doesn't matter, let's just save the world. You have people like Spook, who was a pretty minor character before, but in this one, he finally comes into his own. He's like, yes, I am this guy. I'm going to be the one to help these people. I'm not just gonna stand around, and that's great to see. Like I said before, you get to see more of the world. You find out what the Koloss are and how they're created. You find out what the Kandra are, how they're created. You find out about their society and more about their powers and all that. That's cool as shit. They introduce a third type of magic in this. Yeah, it's called hemalurgy, and it's basically what the Inquisitors use, because, they have all those spikes driven into their bodies, and that's where they get their powers from. And there's just so much depth to it, even though they really don't spend that much time going into it in this book. It's just as deep as allomancy and feruchemy. And so, it just blows my mind how every time you think you've seen everything that the world in this book has to offer, it gives you more. And then by the end of this book, the world has completely changed. So, I know there's a sequel series to this. I'm sure that's going to be completely different again. That's just fucking fantastic. I love when books can do that sort of thing. And once more, for the people in the back, the ending of this is insane, okay? It's not quite on the same level as, like, the Demonata or the Maze Runner, because those are my two favorite book series endings ever, but it's way up there, okay? Like I said, you're not going to guess how it ends or what happens. Just don't even bother. Just go into it and then be pleasantly surprised at the end. And I'm also realizing just now that this is the first full series by Brandon Sanderson that I've actually read all of. I've read his individual books, and those all have great climaxes, Elantris, all the Stormlight books, etc. But this is the first time I've actually had multiple books of his that all led up to one point. And now I'm, even more excited to read the next series after this, and I'm more excited for the rest of the Stormlight books, and I've only been reading him for a year now, but I'm gonna run out of his published books pretty soon, and that makes me kind of sad. It's gonna be another 2 years or so till Stormlight 4 comes out, so I don't know, I'll have to find something else by him. Nothing else to really say here. If you have read the first 2 books in this series, then fucking read this one, because this one's great. I don't know how you could watch the rest of this and get anything else out of this other than this book is great. And if you haven't read this series, but you do kind of like fantasy, if you're feeling iffy about this at all, just go check it out. Check out the first book. If you don't like it within the first, 200 pages, you're not going to like this series. But if you like fantasy at all, you're going to fucking love it. Please subscribe. I need to move out of this place, and I need to eat. Please subscribe and like and comment and shit, because just please, I don't want to die.